I'm delighted to be joined once again by a very important guest, steering committee member, one of the founders, and spokesman for the New York Teachers for Choice, Michael Kane. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason. We really appreciate being here. Yeah.
I'm glad that we connected, Michael, because your group and everything that the New York Teachers for Choice are speaking out about and fighting for is so important, not just to New Yorkers who have young children who are in school, but this is, in many ways, you guys are kind of a canary in the coal mine right here. Your efforts are discovering things about some of the proposals that are being made for people to go back to their jobs, whether it's coming from private companies or government employment. What can you tell us about what's happened since our last meeting? We were with you guys when you had that big Zoom phone call with attorney Michael Sussman. What's been happening lately?
Well, there's been a lot of stuff happening. I want to, before we get into so many different things, one of the things I want to put out there is that New York Teachers for Choice, our main platform is that we're 100% against any medical mandate for any American to keep their job, especially educators. And right now we have a list of 7 demands for all New York State unions. My union is New York State Teacher Unions. Mine is the United Federation of Teachers, very powerful union for teachers in New York City, but also their umbrella groups too, the AFT, NYSET, NEA. We're putting out 7 demands now that all relate to medical mandates that are being attempted to be placed on us. And if those demands aren't met, on March 1st, we are going to stop paying union dues to our unions and divert that money into an emergency health defense fund in preparation for what we see as almost certain lawsuits that are going to come up when they try to effectively force vaccinate teachers to keep their jobs and continue with the forced testing regime that they're doing. I just quickly want to read through what those 7 demands are that we have of New York State unions. It's right at the top of our website. If you go to nyteachersforchoice.org, it's the very first thing. It says, "We demand." You click on that. And here are the demands. The first one. Here we go. Number 1. Actually, I just want to make sure I could see this well. UFT President Michael Mulgrew needs to release a formal statement in support of choice for teachers and students pertaining to the flu and COVID vaccinations. And AFT President Randi Weingarten must rescind her statement supporting forced vaccination of all in-person teachers. United Healthcare Workers Union 1199 has already released such a statement, and that's for nurses and healthcare workers. They've already said that their members will have choice for the vaccine. Why not teachers? 2, New York teacher unions, specifically the UFT, must call for all contracts that govern in-school COVID testing to be made public. It is insane that educators must consent to a testing regime at their job, while many of the public contracts governing the regime are illegally kept secret. Why is our union supporting secrecy? Number 3, New York teacher unions, specifically the UFT, must end the threat of unpaid leave for staff who do not consent to in-school COVID testing. Since it is only 20% of staff and students being tested once a week, it does not make schools less safe to have an opt-out option. Many school districts throughout New York are functioning this way right now, and so can New York City schools. Number 4, New York teacher unions, specifically the UFT, must stop supporting the removal of children from in-person learning if their parents choose to opt them out of in-school COVID testing. They've removed 12,000 children from New York City schools for this already. Number 5, New York teacher unions must demand that principals, administrators, and supervisors cannot pressure staff or students whatsoever in regards to whether or not they ever receive either a flu or COVID vaccination. Number 6, elementary students who are clearly upset when selected for random in-school COVID testing must not be tested. We have heard of New York City students selected for testing in school with no parent accompanying them breaking down into uncontrollable tears, and even soiling themselves. This is child abuse. There's no way around
Wow.
that. And New York teacher unions, specifically the UFT, must take a strong stance against such abusive practices by the DOE and their contractors. Finally, number 7, teachers should receive paid time off for any adverse reactions they experience from getting the COVID vaccine. We have already heard accounts from educators, in many cases from our personal friends,
Whoa.
firsthand accounts, getting violently ill, vomiting, and
Holy
even
cow.
losing eyesight. We hope that was temporary, immediately following their COVID vaccination. So those are the 7 demands that we currently have.
Let me
on the
pause you a
UFT.
second, Michael, because you've just laid out some incredible, I mean, the trauma to a young child being embarrassed and frightened like that in a school setting is something that could affect someone's psychological development for the rest of their lives. Being so frightened that they soil themselves in front of their peers, that's got to result in ridicule, embarrassment, shame. I mean, and blindness. I'm shocked.
Yeah. So I believe that the policy is already there, that if a child is upset, especially an elementary school child, when they're getting tested, COVID tested, they're not to be tested. That policy is there, but we're not seeing it be enforced properly in certain places. We're hearing accounts from people in the school who would be able to know that these things have happened. So what we're calling on is for the UFTs to stand behind enforcing what is supposed to already be done in terms of that one demand. So if you have a 6-year-old, which is happening, 6-year-olds are getting tested. There's people that are in virtually looks like hazmat materials.
Scary to a kid, not their doctor, not
they're
their
wearing
parents.
a mask.
Right.
They got a mask, they got a shield, they got a very long Q-tip, and their kids are in line 6 feet apart coming in for the test. Yeah, for some of the kids, you're having some very extreme situations. So one of the things I want to point out, most of your viewers probably see this. These are demands for teachers, but for students also. We are very concerned for what's happening for students. And as I've said on your show before, no forced COVID vaccination for teachers or students, no forced COVID vaccination, flu vaccination also for teachers or students, because that's one that's coming up too. Massachusetts tried to force the flu shot on everyone from pre-K till age 30 was what they had. Any student, if you were a student age 29 going to a master's class, they said you were going to have to get a flu shot. But thankfully, Aaron Siri was the lead attorney, and Del Bigtree's I Can stopped that, and they rescinded that. But I'm just bringing up the flu shot as well, too, because this is not just about COVID-19. This is not just about a COVID vaccine. This is about medical mandates on the American populace to maintain employment and your life. That's what we're actually dealing with here. So yeah, I think I've said a lot right there for now. So
well, it's stunning information, Michael. And one of the most shocking things that came about, I forget where I realized this, either from the presentations that the speakers were giving outside the teachers union building in Staten Island, or possibly during the phone call. I think it was a combination of listening to both. Some of the teachers had identified that they couldn't quite put 2 and 2 together as far as how this testing was being done, because they weren't making an effort to test everyone in the school, which would be the most sensible approach to trying to make sure that nobody had it or to isolate anybody who did have it. But it was that there was a group of 20% of the population in the school that were being repeatedly tested. And I believe someone on the call had even suggested that this sounds like a control group for a trial of something rather than an actual test. And what else could be the explanation for why one particular individual would be tested repeatedly while others weren't tested at all?
So there are a couple of reasons that might be. When dealing with in-school COVID testing, there are some people like me and people in my organization that have not signed the consent or don't feel they need to consent or will consent and won't. There's other people that really want to get tested and actually appreciate a free test.
Right.
So one of the things our attorney, Michael Sussman, who we'll talk about, the lawsuits he's brought in and what a great job he did for us. One of the things he brought up to the DOE was he said, why don't you just make this voluntary? Since you only want 10 to 20% people a week, you're going to get it. Like there's plenty of people in the school that want the free test. Why are you trying to force it?
Right.
Now, when rubber hits the road and they show up and they have their list, it's the principal that has to coordinate with the testers that are coming in and actually make it happen. So in a lot of cases, if you didn't sign a consent, principal's not coming for you. Also, they've threatened unpaid leave on teachers. To my knowledge, so far, that has not happened. I'm not positive about that, but we haven't had people say it actually happened. It's been threatened. Principals, like good teachers, need good teachers. So a principal's not going to their good teacher who didn't consent and then forcing them to do it and then kicking them out. And then what? Getting a substitute that they've never seen before, if they're lucky. Sometimes principals are teaching classes right now. So some of this stuff actually ends up just becoming practical as well too. And while I don't have all the information for every school and the way everything happens, also remember this, Jason, for the first time ever, the CSA, that's the principals union in New York City, had a vote of no confidence in de Blasio and Carranza for running the school district. It has never happened in New York City history. All right. So the principals
That's a big deal.
Voted. Oh, that's a huge deal that doesn't get spoken about enough. But when it did happen, it was big news. So what I'm saying is the DOE and principals are not completely aligned now either. So
wow.
There's a lot of factors going on.
Yeah, we've been hearing a lot about schools. Obviously that's a bone of contention there with the boneheads in Albany and elsewhere. The other thing that was a major concern, Michael, the last time we spoke and when we had that Zoom call with Michael Sussman and the other members of New York Teachers for Choice, was this notion that the samples were being held by a company called Fulgent Genetics or something like this, a company that runs a genetic database. And there was a very important unanswered question about what their intention was to do with this genetic material.
Yeah. Right. So this is kind of where New York Teachers for Choice really started. In August, we found out we'd have to do mandatory COVID testing. And then it broke that the company that was going to be conducting the testing was Fulgent Genetics. So I did some quick online research and found out their main business was maintaining genetic libraries and catalogs of information. So I asked my district union rep, is my DNA specimen, is the specimen they take protected? He said, I'll ask. He wasn't able to get an answer. So then we reached out to the head of our union. We reached out to de Blasio, to Carranza, the head of schools. We had hundreds of teachers and parents. We did action alerts. No one was responding to us. And the concern was, if Fulgent Genetics owns this database, how do we know for sure that this new testing they just got into, that they won't cross those specimens into their database? And why is no one answering us? I thought this was going to be a quick answer of no, of course that's not going to happen. The specimens are disposed of. They're destroyed, but no one would talk to us until we got Harvard-trained civil rights attorney Michael Sussman to start writing letters on our behalf. Then there was answers coming. But at the end of the day, even Mr. Sussman didn't believe that what they were guaranteeing us was enough. So he sued the New York City DOE in a case called Kane versus NYC DOE. And the judge ordered that there be a stipulation written between the Department of Education and our attorney, Michael Sussman, guaranteeing that the specimens would be destroyed after a positive or negative COVID result was found, and that they would not be used for any other purpose. So we have that stipulation. It was court ordered, was agreed to by the DOE and by our attorney. Interestingly, the DOE tried to weasel their way out of it, and the judge actually ended up yelling at them in open court, was yelling at the DOE's attorney, saying, "You are more of a hindrance than a help." And said other things too, including, "You're trying to make parents look like they're the bad guys when they're not." She went further and said, "Why can't the parents bring their own tests from their own doctor into the school instead of having their kids subjected to this without their parent there. The DOE lawyer said, Your Honor, that's not even in Sussman's complaint. And the judge said, I don't want to hear that.
Wow. It's
That was
so
a bad day for the
satisfying when
DOE.
the judge yells at the opposition. That's good. So, I mean, it's a valid question. I mean, Michael, we're getting close to the point where the only possible answer to that question could be that they're doing something with it that they don't want you to know about, because it's
I won't say that I completely agree with that, but I think that there was a loophole that was open that our attorney Michael Sussman helped to close by getting the stipulation. So after we got that stipulation, we still didn't have every contract public yet. So I was working with another's attorney's office. They weren't representing us, but they were in touch with me and what was going on. And that was Siri and Glimstad, which is Aaron Siri's law firm. And he does all of the litigations that ICANN and Del Bigtree are involved with. Well, he had filed the Freedom of Information Act with New York City Health and Hospitals. Now, it's complicated, but not all the contracts are with the DOE. They're also with New York City Health and Hospitals because it's involving this new testing and medical procedures.
I don't trust them at all.
So he filed the Freedom of Information Act in September. They said, give us 20 days to respond. 20 days passed, 40 days passed, 60 days passed, right? So time just kept going on. So then they filed an administrative appeal. And eventually, after our lawsuit was done, almost 5 months into this whole thing, they finally released the original contract. And in the original contract, I'd never said that Fulgent could do anything other than test, but it never said anything about destruction of the samples and the specimens. So there's a little loophole there. They weren't given permission to do anything with our specimens, but they weren't explicitly told they had to destroy them. So what does that mean? They could have held them on file, so to speak, for months, for years, for decades, waiting for a change in law or a loophole somewhere where they could then go and use those specimens. Now, I'm not accusing Fulgent Genetics of doing this. What I'm saying is we found a loophole where it could happen. And thanks to our attorney, Michael Sussman, we closed that loophole. Now, there are some people that say, well, do you trust them? How do you know? I still don't want to get tested. I respect that. And I understand that there's only so much we can do and only so much we can know. But I'm glad that we've closed that loophole. I'm glad that we have this precedent that we set. And it does at least limit the possibility for corruption.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that you are forcing this conversation is a huge deal. And I mean, you know, I know that you're in a very sensitive position in terms of not wanting to publicly say anything, but I could say whatever I want about these guys. That is my opinion. I don't have any facts. I'm not stating that these things are true and correct. I'm saying it's my opinion that there could be no logical reason for refusing a 6-year-old child to go to the doctor that they know and trust with their parent to provide a test. It's not like they're going to the plumber for the test. This is a licensed New York doctor. And I mean, this is just obvious to anyone who's a teacher, who's a doctor, who's a parent. You can't take kids and subject them to traumatic crap with strangers they don't know and embarrassment in front of their friends at this delicate age where they're developing psychologically, physically, emotionally. I mean, this is so abhorrent what you're describing.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I feel that you're pretty accurate in what you're saying here. I also you brought up I think right at the top of this interview, New York City's the canary in the coal mine, and I think that's really the thing. We're the capital of the world, even though we got pummeled, you know, over the past year and everything. We are the capital of the world. Where New York City goes, everybody goes. This is the example for the new reimagined school that they want happening. They want you to send your kids to school and go to your job and be forced and subjected to medical mandates that are out of your control, that aren't happening with your doctor. People have already argued that these in-school COVID tests are a precedent for mandatory COVID vaccinations. You want to know why? Because the COVID tests are under EUA emergency use authorization also, just like the COVID vaccine is. And thankfully, the good folks at Children's Health Defense are currently suing New York City Department of Education, saying you can't mandate the COVID test in school because emergency use authorization cannot be mandatory by federal law. It actually is almost an open and shut case. We're waiting for the judge to decide on that.
Right.
So the whole canary in the coal mine is some people that have like reached out to me and been like, yeah, well, I'm not in New York City. I'm like, well, you will be soon. I mean, like it's coming to a theater near you. So pay attention.
Exactly. Yeah. That's good to know that Children's Health Defense is on top of this. Robert Kennedy is just so impressive in so many ways. And I don't know that there's a bigger legal medical expert in the world with this sort of material. So that's excellent to know that they're on board. But as you said, it's a slam dunk case. There's so many of these situations where, you know, people just go for this kind of, if it goes, it goes method. And if nobody sues them to stop them from doing it, they get away with it. And they'll push that very far in court. So it's good to know that we have honest, hardworking lawyers like Robert Kennedy Jr. who are on the right side of this.
Yeah, so I believe on that case, RFK Jr. is on it, Mary Holland, Jim Mermigas from Long Island, who's been really pushing back on a lot of the forced closures for restaurant gyms. He's done a lot of things, as well as Ray Flores. So they've assembled a really, really good team. The one thing I am concerned about is they could win and say, yeah, this is emergency use authorization, these COVID tests. You have to have an opt-out option. And then in a couple months, FDA will say, well, what do you know? We fully approved them. Right. So now it's fully approved and now it can be mandated. So, you know, it is a cat and mouse game to a certain extent. But like you also said, we have to push, we have to challenge at every point because our freedom demands it, you know?
Yeah. It's amazing to me, Michael. I mean, I've been saying this a lot. I hope people aren't getting sick of it, but I keep repeating it because I think it's so important and it's a logic issue. You don't have to be a medical doctor to understand, no matter what the circumstance, whether it's a viral infection or whatever, if a doctor or anyone prescribes a treatment to you and you do that for 11 months, but the condition gets worse, where is the logic in continuing to do that? Where I see it going is you got to stop and say, wait a minute, we've been locked down, wearing masks, social distancing and isolating for 11 months, but yet the television is still telling everybody that this COVID problem is getting worse. So obviously, to even a dumb person, that's not working. We need to reevaluate what we're doing and come up with some other solution. So more of the same seems to be all that's being prescribed by the bureaucrats in government and these union leaders.
Yeah, I think it also depends on, I think there's so much that is wrong. So much. Like this winter, there's almost no flu. I mean, and I don't think there has been a winter in recorded history where there was no flu. And I've had some people in conversations say to me, well, the COVID ate the flu. And these were like, and these are people that are just like trying to think it through in their heads. And like, these aren't MDs or doctors or anything. And I'm like, okay, well, I want to see some doctors say that. I want to see some scientists come out and say COVID ate the flu. Right. I mean, I'm being facetious, but I mean, just like for some reason, for some medical reason, COVID made flu go bye-bye. No one's saying that. Everyone's just kind of saying like, well, what's happened to flu? This is amazing. This is unbelievable. There's no flu. It's the least flu we've ever had. But like COVID is so high. I mean, so just so much just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, let me address that for a second, because I know you're very busy and probably don't have time to watch all the shows on Crowdsource the Truth. But one of the featured shows every Friday, we have John Cullen Investigates. And John's a data scientist who used to be with Oracle and actually worked on the product that is used to do that Johns Hopkins COVID-19 panic map. So what John's been doing is he's been going through state by state coroner data, because the CDC and the WHO haven't been announcing flu deaths since March of 2020. That was announced by Elizabeth Birx. But what's interesting is the coroners are posthumously testing and finding that there is a huge amount of flu death. The other thing that John has gone through and charted is the number of COVID-19 deaths or deaths attributed to COVID-19 broken down by age group. And this is data he's getting from the CDC. He's not making this up. He's just plugging it in and, programs make these charts, victims of COVID-19 from 5 to 14 years of age, and this is out of the total number reported dead as of, this is until about a month ago. We're looking at 51 individuals between the ages of 5 and 14. So the ages of students that you would be interacting with, a total of 51 out of 330 million people in the United States have succumbed to this disease. I think there's a number of ailments that more than 51 children in this category have died from in the same time, but we're not shutting down schools to address those. Even when we go up to 24 or even 34 years of age, we're talking about 2,500 people. This is, ridiculous that they're closing everything down as a result of this. I didn't really have this ready to share, but this is, John's done all kind of charts here comparing the COVID deaths to the influenza deaths based on this information from the coroners. So we didn't hear anything about influenza until John started doing these reports, and it caught the attention of Fox News personality Laura Ingraham. And she started reporting on the exact information that John Cullen was putting out, which I think got it a lot more national attention and garnered some of these, explanations that COVID ate the flu or that the masks are protecting people from all of that is pure nonsense. What appears to be happening is manipulation of data, manipulation of reporting. We've got COVID-19, which, what are the symptoms? Except for loss of taste, the symptoms are identical to influenza. So if someone has shortness of breath, fever, aches, they're going to go to the hospital and they test you for COVID. The thing that's interesting is the coronavirus is one of the most common viruses known to man. They've been around forever. This PCR test doesn't tell you if it's COVID-19 or some other coronavirus. They're just testing people for viruses that many people have in their body and coming back with a positive result. I think we're seeing a lot of very manipulated data here.
Well, I think that's true. I do think that there is, I don't know for sure. I don't, but I do think that there is something unique that to a lot of people that get COVID, because I do know people that have gotten it, people in my family, people close to me, people who have lost their sense of smell. But they're still alive. They are still alive, yes, that have lost their sense of smell for long periods of time. So definitely some odd things. I don't want to play down the fact that I think that we have experienced something serious and different, but I don't believe we've experienced something that we're being told we are experiencing. I don't believe that. I definitely believe, not only believe, I mean, it's really been proven that there's data manipulation. It's really been proven that the CDC was encouraging for COVID to be listed as death, especially at the height of the pandemic. And it was said in CDC guidance that they weren't going to be double checking. If you think this was COVID, it's safe to assume this was a COVID death, and we're not going to go back and double check. So there was and it's like, why? Why
it's
is that
not scientific
happening?
at all.
Right.
I mean, all these questions asking why are very good questions, but they start to accumulate with no valid answers, and we really can kind of come to a logical conclusion. I can't recall if you and I have discussed this, but in, I think, 2005, and this is from the CDC's website. I'm not making this up. This is not a conspiracy theory. They decided it would be a great idea to dig up a bunch of U.S. Army soldiers who died in World War I, not from injuries in battle, but from Spanish flu. And these soldiers were buried at an army base in Alaska where they were buried in permafrost. So they were able to extract lung tissue samples from the soldiers, and using genetic, a CRISPR machine, genetic engineering, they were able to genetically reconstruct the 1918 influenza virus. Now, I'm not really sure what the scientific purpose of this was, but there's been more research that John Cullen has done that really causes us to believe that what we're seeing could in fact be an outbreak of the 1918 influenza. And they don't want people to know about that, because then the question becomes, well, why the hell did you resurrect the deadliest virus ever known to man? And these are all questions.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the whole originally COVID, SARS-CoV-2 came from a bat in a wet market in China. That was the original. There's a Wuhan wet market bat, and it jumped to humans. And that's what happened. Anybody paying attention to that at all? I mean, Michio Kaku, from CUNY University, a physics professor, has said no, there's no evidence of that. I mean,
Right.
there's or anyone in the science community that's actually reading the science and following it has determined there's no way that happened. But what we do know is that I believe there was a level 4 lab in Wuhan where they were experimenting on viruses, specifically coronaviruses,
Yeah.
and whether intentional, whether unintentional, whether sloppy, whatever the case might be, it looks like, and even there's been discussions about the genetic sequence that they have on the SARS-CoV-2 itself, saying that it definitely appears that there's some manipulation there that would have happened in a lab. So, and for some reason, with all the science and toys we have, powerful men love to play God with these tiny little bacteria and virus and stuff. And I don't, it's very, very dangerous. I don't get it. They have all their explanations as to why it's a good thing, these gain of functions. Well, if someone ever weaponizes it, we're going to have the antidote against it because we're going to, and it never quite really adds up and makes sense to me. But very scary stuff. I agree. It's very scary
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, gain of function testing, as I understand it, at some point was made illegal in the United States. And that's
Right.
one of the reasons why some of this research is happening in China. There's a story that we've spoken about quite a bit on Crowdsource the Truth, but we haven't heard much about it since 2019. This doctor, a Chinese Canadian researcher working at Canada's only level 4 biolab in Winnipeg, was escorted out by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We don't know what happened to her. We don't know what she's been charged with, but she was sending samples to Wuhan, China. Obviously, she is Chinese. I think she had students who were with her. There was, of course, that indictment of Charles Lieber in 2020, the nanotechnology expert from Harvard. We know that Jeffrey Epstein was involved with scientists at Harvard. That's very strange. There's a lot of reason to believe he was involved in a blackmail network and just a lot of really strange circumstances surrounding that guy. Charles Lieber and his indictment, it's not really clear to me what's going on with this, but it was both Professor Lieber and 2 of his students who failed to reveal on their student visa applications that they were active members of the Chinese army. So it's very interesting that all this research is going on at these universities and at these biolabs, and we hear nothing about it, but yet the news is blasting about how you got to put on a mask and the numbers that are going up. We're hearing about cases, really. And I mean, again, I'm not trying to minimize anything either, but we've heard so many stories about people dying of all kinds of things, heart attacks, and they test positive for COVID. It gets recorded as a COVID death. There was one report of a motorcycle accident where the decedent had COVID, and that was recorded as a COVID death. So, I mean, again, where these numbers come from, how they're calculated, I'm not denying that people have relatives and friends who've had it. I'm just saying, I really liked it when President Trump said something to the effect of, hey, we've had Ebola, we've had swine flu, this is just another viral infection, everybody go back to work. And I was very disappointed when he made that about face to we're at war with COVID. Now that we see Joe Biden in the White House, he's changed his tune from having some magical remedy to end this to basically saying what everybody knew. He doesn't know how or when it's going to end. There's all kinds of questions about the vaccine. Tell us a little bit about some of the firsthand reporting you were talking about with teachers losing eyesight. When's the last time you were in touch with that person or persons?
There's one of our members who was directly in touch with a friend who received the COVID vaccine and experienced what we believe was a temporary blindness. I need to discuss with that member again to see if that person did regain their eyesight. We don't know what it was exactly. I also want to add, I don't know if that individual suffers from any sort of anxiety disorder or things like that that might have also played into it. I do know people who get really shocked at the sight of blood and have experienced things like temporary blindness. But if I do find out more details on that, I will look into it, Jason, and I'll let you know what we hear on that. But beyond that, in mainstream reports, we're seeing adverse events. People are dying shortly after getting the COVID vaccine. And while it might not be, 10% of everybody getting it or 5% or large amounts, for the person who died, that's 100% that they're going to die after receiving the vaccine. We've even seen the New York Times interview a blood specialist from Johns Hopkins who said that a doctor who got a rare blood disorder and passed after getting the COVID vaccine, that his death was a medical certainty linked to
Whoa.
the COVID vaccine. And that's a direct quote from the New York Times.
Let's
From a
make sure
Johns
we
Hopkins
reiterate
expert.
that for the various fact checkers on YouTube who are going to want to say that we're doing something that they don't like. Here it is, New York Times saying doctor's death after COVID vaccine is being investigated. Perhaps it was a later article, but
Oh,
this
no,
was,
they certainly did end up. It could have been a follow-up article to this, where they definitely did interview a blood specialist from Johns Hopkins University that said there was a virtual medical certainty that the death was linked to the COVID vaccine. And he said it's extremely rare. He said we might see it again, but it's extremely rare. But again, for the person it happens to, it's not rare. It's 100% for the person that it happens to. So this is why New York Teachers for Choice were completely against medical mandates. The idea that one size fits all medicine is legitimate for
yeah.
every person is an abomination. And there's no other way of putting it. What makes you well might make me sick. And I want to say, every person getting the COVID vaccine out there, I support you and your decision. And I hope and pray that that vaccine does the best it possibly can for you and that it protects you and your family and that you have no problems from it. But that's your choice. You should not be saying every single person in the country and the world must get this to be a member of society, to maintain employment, any of those things.
Wow. So here it's saying shortly after receiving the vaccine, Dr. Michael developed an extremely serious form of a condition known as acute immune thrombocytopenia, which prevented his blood from clotting properly. And that sounds quite serious. So this is coming right from
And
the New York
Jason, and what
Times.
you just went past is there was a statement from Pfizer that they're actively investigating it. So, well, that's great. That makes me feel great. The product that they invented, they are actively investigating to see that make sure they can clear it, that it is
Right.
okay. Because so I'll trust that investigation.
Well, I mean, of course, we all know that they, because of this, intense emergency, that they had to, put this thing out there under the emergency use authorization without testing on animals. It's the first time they've used this type of mRNA vaccine. So the long-term genetic effects, the effects on offspring, are certainly not well understood. Pfizer says right here that they're investigating the thing. I would prefer to have these things investigated before they start injecting it into loads of people, but that's not what they want to do.
Right. No, I'm with you on that. And I just want to remind people, if you want to learn more about what my group does, we're nyteachersforchoice.org. NY Teachers for Choice. There's no number in that. It's FOR, the way that you spell that out. And yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. It's getting crazy out there, what they're expecting us to do. We have a petition that actually is on the front page of our website. If you just scroll down a little, it's a petition against forced vaccine mandates of educators. We have over 17,000 signatures on that. We know for a fact tens of thousands of teachers in New York City, we know for a fact, do not want to be forced to get this vaccine. And even those who want to get the vaccine don't want their job tied to whether or not they
Right.
get this vaccine. Medical mandates are really, really scary things, and they're creeping up more and more. And Jason, I don't know if I ever told you this, but in 2018, the brave teachers in West Virginia went on strike because they had a medical mandate where they had to wear Fitbits that monitored their activity, and that determined their insurance premiums.
Whoa.
So, and that's where we're headed. There's a brilliant researcher named Allison McDowell. She runs a website called wrenchingthegears.com. And Allison McDowell is talking about how the future is completely and totally medical mandates for everyone in every possible way. And she was the one who put me onto that. And she said, hey, Mike, you need to check this out. Because long before COVID, 2 years ago, they were trying to strap Fitbits on teachers' arms to determine the rates that they paid for their insurance. So when we talk about the COVID vaccine and COVID testing, that's the number one thing right now. But there is more stuff in line besides just vaccination. There's a lot more. Oh, I'll tell you one other one too. Biometric identity is something that you're going to see popping up everywhere. We know they want vaccine passports for you to be able to travel. One of the other ones that's going to come, mark my word on this, is a biometric student passport. And the way we said NYC is the canary in the coal mine, I'll bet you anything they try to do that within the next 12 to 24 months. What
do you mean by that? What is the biometric student passport?
So, I'm sorry, Jason. I just noticed I have a little problem here with battery. So just give me 1 second.
No problem.
Am I back? I'm back. Okay,
great.
Okay. So, believe it or not, there's a Fulgent Genetics link to this. So Fulgent Genetics is running the testing in New York City for COVID. But the founder of Fulgent Genetics, I believe his name is Ming Hisai. He founded a company called Cogent Systems, which was a biometric company. He sold it to 3M. So that's just very interesting to me that Fulgent Genetics was able to pen a COVID test deal in New York City schools that was kept secret for months and months before our attorneys were able to get the documents taken out. This guy was also in the biometrics system. What could that be? That could be a retina scan. That could be DNA. That could be fingerprints. But you're going to see an attempt to bring biometric passports anywhere they can get it. It's almost like whack-a-mole, the vaccine passport, but we knocked that down. That's not going to happen. Oh, you need your vaccine or your barcode to buy tickets from Ticketmaster. Oh, that got knocked down. Oh, they pop up all over the place because they're just trying to see what they could sneak in and make socially acceptable. Then all of those things can eventually be tied to public assistance, right? You want to get food stamps. Well, do you have your Fitbit? Are you doing the activity? Are you eating the right food that we say you need to eat? This is where things are actually headed. And believe it or not, Allison McDowell believes that one of the inroads for that might be diabetes management, because we can all say we hate diabetes. We can all say we want people to eat well and exercise well and not get diabetes, right? We'd all agree with that. Well, so let's put Fitbits on those people and let's monitor them and such, and let's get IDs on them and biometric IDs to track. So you see where this can go. It could go for something that sounds like it's a good idea, we agree with, and now all of a sudden they got you. They got all your information.
There's a lot of things coming back when I look up this Cogent Systems, and frankly, it seems like they're already in place doing a lot of biometric things with the government and various different, CogentID.com, applicant processing services.
It was started by the CEO. The CEO
Ming Tsai.
of Genetics, Ming Tsai. He's, I believe he was Chinese born, but I think he's a naturalized American citizen. He's a billionaire. He's not a millionaire. He's a billionaire. And Cogent was one of the companies he founded, but he doesn't own it now. He sold it to 3M. So it's just interesting, the networks and the ties that you see as you start looking into all the things that these people have done. And now him and his companies are in New York City schools, Interesting.
Insidious, for sure. I don't like the fact that they're keeping all these contracts secret. I don't like the fact that they don't want people to use their own doctors for their little tiny kids and go to the doctor with them, which would, I mean, listen, I was a kid. I didn't like going to the doctor, and I knew the doctor and trusted the doctor. You develop a rapport and even a love for the doctor when you're a child. You don't want some stranger coming in there and jamming this thing in your nose. And we've heard other teachers from your group telling us that there are questions about the qualifications of some of the people that are doing it. Here's our buddy Ming Tsai, born in China,
Billionaire.
went to the to USC,
So-
I think.
So, Jason, this is actually very unfortunate right now for me. But speaking of children, I could hear one of my children just
No
outside
problem.
the door,
Much
not
more
doing
important.
too well right now.
Okay.
And
You go take care of that, Michael. Everybody is going to check out nyteachers.choice.org. People can sign the petition online, and everybody wants to stay on top of this story. And, you know, as things develop, we'll be back in touch with you. I want to thank you for joining me tonight, Michael, and I want to thank everybody for watching. I'll see everybody tomorrow.
thank you